The knock came at 11:58. Ambrose knew this because he had been watching the clock on the mantelpiece, the one that had stopped in 1743 and never been restarted, and he had developed the habit, over several centuries, of marking time by other means. The rain against the glass. The particular frequency of the city at night, the way the street below shifted from the last of the evening crowd to the first of the genuine dark. He had not been expecting anyone. He was never expecting anyone. That was, in fact, the precise arrangement he preferred. The townhouse on Mercer Street was not listed anywhere. It did not appear in any directory, digital or otherwise. The brass plate beside the door said nothing, because Ambrose had removed it in 1987 after deciding that the name Crane had accumulated enough unsolicited correspondence. The neighbors, on the rare occasions they saw him at all, had learned not to wave. Not because he was unfriendly, exactly, but because he had the particular quality of a man who existed in a separate layer of reality, close enough to see, but separated by something thicker than glass. He had been sitting in the study with a book he was not reading. This was a habit. He owned approximately 4,000 books and had read most of them twice, and was currently using one of them as an object to hold while he thought about things he did not want to think about. The particular things he did not want to think about tonight were the same things he did not want to think about most nights, which was to say, the specific quality of silence in a house that had held other people, once, and now held only him and the memory of where they used to stand. The knock came again. 3 times. Uneven, the second knock softer than the first, as though whoever was doing it had reconsidered halfway through and then committed anyway out of desperation rather than confidence. Ambrose set the book down. He did not move immediately. He had lived long enough to know that midnight knocking came in categories, and most of them were not his concern. Drunks who had miscounted the doors. Delivery drivers whose applications had sent them somewhere wrong. People who had the right street and the wrong number and would realize it in a moment. But the third knock did not come. Instead, there was a sound he had not expected. A soft, involuntary sound, barely audible through the door and the rain. The kind of sound a person makes when they are trying very hard not to make any sound at all, and their body has stopped cooperating. He was in the hallway before he had made a conscious decision to move. The door opened onto rain and the cold, and a woman on his front step who was not looking at him because she was braced against the doorframe with one hand and looking at the ground with the concentrated focus of someone managing pain with the last available edge of their attention. She was young, late 20s perhaps, dark hair plastered flat against her face by the rain, a coat that had been adequate for a different kind of night, unbuttoned because it no longer closed. Beneath it, the reason it no longer closed was apparent and significant. Very significant. She looked up. Her eyes were dark brown and exhausted and ferociously, almost aggressively alert, the eyes of someone whose body was running on nothing but would not permit itself to stop. "I know this isn't," she said, and then stopped and pressed her lips together and breathed through her nose for 3 seconds in the specific, practiced rhythm of someone who had been doing this for a while. "I'm sorry," she said when she had finished. "I counted the wrong door. I was trying to get to the one on the end. I saw the light. And she straightened up with visible effort and pushed the wet hair off her face. "I'll go." She would not go. Ambrose could see this clearly. She was wearing canvas shoes that had soaked through entirely, and her left hand was white-knuckled on the doorframe, and she was swaying with the precise micro-movement of someone whose body had made a decision that their mind had not yet been informed of. "You will not go," he said. It came out more definitive than he intended. It always did. 7 centuries of being the final word in a room had a way of removing the question mark from sentences. She blinked. "I really think. You are soaked through. You are in pain. It is midnight, and the door on the end belongs to a man named Gerald, who is currently in Tampa." He paused. I can tell you this because I have heard him discuss it at length through a wall for 3 days. She stared at him. He stepped back from the door. Come inside. She didn't move. She was looking at him with the specific calculation of a woman alone at midnight, doing the rapid necessary arithmetic of stranger danger versus current circumstances. And he understood this, and waited because it was the correct thing to do, and also because he had not lived this long by misreading rooms. I don't know you, she said. No, you just opened the door. Yes, that's. She exhaled. That's either very kind or very suspicious. It is neither. It is practical. You are standing in the rain, and you knocked on my door. He met her eyes. His expression was what Percival, on various occasions across 4 centuries, had described as professionally neutral, and also somehow still alarming. He had been working on this. I am not going to harm you, he said. You have my word. And I am aware that the word of a stranger at midnight is worth very little, but it is what I have to offer, and I offer it without conditions. Something shifted in her face. Not relief exactly, something that had been held at absolute tension for a very long time, releasing by one careful degree. She stepped inside. He closed the door behind her. The hallway was warm, which it always was because Ambrose kept the heat at a temperature designed for human comfort rather than his own, since he did not have a preference, and the light was low and amber and the kind that did not assault. She stood on the hall rug and dripped, and looked around with the expression of someone filing information rapidly and assessing exits. My name is Nora, she said, like she was establishing terms. Ambrose, he said. She nodded once. Okay, Ambrose. Another contraction moved through her. He could see it in the way her whole body reorganized itself around the fact of it. She did not make a sound. She put her hand on the hall table and breathed and waited for it to pass with the grim, competent patience of someone who had been doing this alone for long enough that it had become a private project. How long? He said. She looked up. Since 7, she said. So, 5 hours, and the hospital. Her jaw tightened, a different kind of pain. I'll get there, she said. I just needed to stop for a minute. I just needed to be somewhere that wasn't outside. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, Come and sit down, and walked toward the kitchen, and after a brief pause in which she appeared to conduct a final internal audit of her options, she followed. The kitchen was not what she expected. Nora had been forming a picture of the man from the hallway, assembling it quickly the way you do when information matters, and the picture had included a certain kind of house. Sparse, maybe cold in the way that money sometimes is. The kind of place where everything is expensive and nothing is comfortable, and the refrigerator contains 3 things, and one of them is wine. The kitchen was none of that. It was old in the way that things are old when they have been lived in for a long time by someone who did not see the need to replace what still worked. The table was heavy oak, scarred and dark with use. The shelves held the kind of accumulated objects that only appear over decades. A copper pot with a dent in the side, a row of glass jars with handwritten labels, a clock on the wall that was not the same as the stopped one in the hall, and was, as far as she could tell, working perfectly. It smelled of old wood and something clean and faintly mineral, like cold stone after rain. She sat down at the table because her body had decided this was happening with or without her permission, and she had learned in the past 5 hours that arguing with her body was a losing proposition. He filled a kettle and set it on the stove without asking her if she wanted tea. She noticed this. She noticed the way he moved, the absolute economy of it, no wasted gesture, nothing provisional. Like a man who had decided where everything was a long time ago and had not needed to reconsider since. He placed a glass of water in front of her. She drank half of it immediately. He sat down across from her at the table Not in the way people sit down to chat, but in the way a person sits when they have decided to be present and are not going to perform it. He did not ask her anything. This was so unexpected that she looked up at him. Most people, in her experience, asked questions. Some of them were kind questions. Some of them were the kind that felt like kindness, but were actually the administration of their own discomfort. Why are you alone? Where is the father? Didn't you have anyone to call? Questions that dressed themselves as concern but were mostly architecture, building a structure that explained her situation in a way that made it her fault, which made it tidier for everyone involved. He just sat there with his hands on the table and said nothing, and looked at her with dark eyes that were very calm and very old in a way she didn't have the processing capacity to examine right now. "Are you a doctor?" she asked. "No." "Do you know anything about?" He paused for exactly the right amount of time. "I have some experience with emergencies," he said, "and I have a phone. I can call for help when it becomes necessary." "When?" she said. "Not if. When?" He confirmed. His voice was level. "This is useful information, not alarming information." She almost laughed. It wasn't funny. The almost laugh came out as something more like a breath with too much feeling in it, and she pressed her hand over her mouth and held it there for a second. "Sorry," she said. "You have nothing to apologize for. I'm in a stranger's kitchen at midnight soaking his chair." "The chair has survived worse," he said, and there was something in his voice so completely, dryly certain that she looked up at him again, and for one brief moment before she assembled her face back into its working configuration, she felt something she had not felt in approximately 6 months. Slightly, inexplicably less alone. The kettle boiled. He made tea without asking how she took it, which she was about to object to on principle, and then set it in front of her with a small ceramic dish that held sugar cubes of all things, actual sugar cubes like it was 1955, and 2 options for milk. "You take it with milk and 1 sugar," he said. She stared. "That is a guess," he said, "based on observation. You can tell me if I'm wrong. How do you?" She stopped. That's exactly right." He sat back down with the composed expression of a man who had not performed a miracle and saw no reason to treat it as one. The tea was good. She didn't know why she was surprised. "Her name is Nora Elliott," she said after a while, because the silence was comfortable enough that adding something to it felt like a choice rather than an obligation. She was saying her name fully this time, both parts, in the way you introduce yourself when you want to be a whole person to someone and not just a problem they've inherited. "I'm 31. I'm a copy editor. I was living on the Upper West Side until 4 months ago, and then I was living in my friend Deb's spare room until 2 weeks ago, and then Deb's brother needed the spare room. And I've been..." She looked at the teacup. "I've been managing." Managing, he said, had the careful neutrality of a word he had chosen specifically because it did not contain pity. "I had a plan," she said. "I had a very good plan. The plan involved a sublet in Astoria and a hospital that takes my insurance, and a bag that was packed and ready by the door." She looked at her hands. The sublet fell through this morning. Ambrose said nothing. He did not say "that's terrible" or "I'm so sorry," or any of the other things that were true, but also somehow sealed the thing off rather than opening it. He said, "What was the plan after tonight?" And she felt, in a way she could not have explained to anyone, that this was the exact right question, the one that looked forward instead of down, and something in her chest that had been locked since approximately 7 this morning shifted one careful increment. "I have a sister," she said. "In Portland. We're not close. We haven't been close for a while." She paused. "She doesn't know about any of this." He nodded once. "But she would come," Nora said, and she heard herself say it, and understood that she believed it. "If I asked, she would come." Then we will ensure you are able to ask, he said, with the complete practical certainty of a man making a commitment he has assessed and found manageable. And Nora Elliott, who had spent 6 months not crying in front of anyone and was not about to stop now, looked at the sugar cubes and breathed very carefully through her nose. Another contraction arrived. He did not flinch, did not look alarmed, did not do the thing people do when confronted with evidence of the body, which was to remove themselves from it emotionally while staying physically present. He simply watched her with the same steady regard, and when it passed he said, "That was closer." 4 minutes, she said. Maybe 3.5. He reached for the phone on the counter. "Not yet," she said. He set it down. "Not yet," she said again, more quietly. "Just 5 more minutes of this." He understood this. She could see that he understood it, that 5 more minutes of this meant 5 more minutes of a kitchen that was warm, and a table that had survived worse, and a man who had given her tea without asking, and had not yet looked at her like a problem he was trying to solve. 5 minutes, he said, and did not look at the clock. His name, he told her, when she asked again properly, was Ambrose Crane. She repeated it back the way she repeated unfamiliar words in manuscripts, feeling the syllables for their weight. "It sounds old," she said. "It is," he said. "Like your family has been here a while." A pause, brief and precise as a rest in music. "Something like that," he said. She was learning the pauses. There were different kinds. There was the pause of a man who was thinking. There was the pause of a man who was deciding how much of the truth was applicable to the current situation. And there was a third kind, rarer, that she was only now beginning to identify, which was the pause of a man who had not spoken about something in a very long time, and was discovering that he did not entirely know the current shape of it. She was copy editor enough to notice. She was in too much pain to pursue it. Instead, she said, "How long have you lived here?" "In this house, 17 years, he said. "In this city, longer. Longer as in longer than 17 years. "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." She looked at him across the table. He looked back with the expression of a man who was not uncomfortable being looked at and was not going to fill the silence with elaboration. "You're strange," she said. He considered this. "I've been told," he said. She would have asked more, but the next contraction arrived with the serious intention of something that was no longer warming up, and she put both hands flat on the table and wrote it out with the full focused silence of a woman who had stopped having the luxury of anything else, and when it passed, she was breathing harder, and Ambrose was already at the counter with the phone. "I think," he said. "I know," she said. She had been in labor for 6 hours, and she was 31 years old, and she was in a stranger's kitchen on Mercer Street, and there was no version of the plan that had included this. But she had also stopped, somewhere around hour 4, expecting the plan to survive contact with the night. He made the call with the same economy he applied to everything else. He gave the address without looking it up, described the situation in 3 sentences that contained exactly the necessary information without anything extra, and when the dispatcher said 12 minutes, he said understood, and ended the call. 12 minutes, he told her. She nodded. He filled another glass of water and brought it to her, and then remained standing near the table in a way that was not hovering. There was a distinction, she was finding, between presence and proximity. Hovering was proximity without presence, the body nearby but the attention self-directed, worrying about the thing rather than being with the person. He was simply there, in the way a room is there, not demanding anything, not requiring management. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You may ask me anything." She noticed the may, filed it with the sugar cubes and the old clock and the particular weight of his pauses. "Why did you open the door?" she said. He appeared to consider this as a genuine question rather than a rhetorical one. "You knocked," he said. "People knock on wrong doors all the time." Most people don't open them at midnight. Most people, he agreed. He sat back down. I heard you before you knocked. From inside the house? I hear a great many things. Like the neighbor in Tampa. Like the neighbor in Tampa, yes, and like the way your breathing changed on the front step, and like the 3 seconds between the second knock and when you decided to stop. She stared at him. He waited. That's either extraordinary hearing or you were already standing at the door. He said nothing, which was she was learning, its own kind of answer. You were already at the door, she said. I was in the hallway, he said, which is not quite the same thing. Why? He looked at his hands on the table. Long fingers, an old ring on his left hand, dark metal without a stone. The kind of ring that looked like it had been made for function rather than sentiment, though it had also clearly been worn for a very long time. I had been sitting in the study, he said, not reading. This is a habit. I do it most evenings. Not reading what? A book about the decline of Byzantine administrative infrastructure in the early 14th century. She blinked. That's deeply dull, he said. Yes, it works, as a method. The mind requires something technical and joyless to give it permission to go elsewhere. Where does it go? She said, when you're not reading. Another pause. The third kind. Back, he said finally. It goes back. She understood this. She did not ask where back was, because she also had a back and she also did not particularly want to talk about it, and she recognized the specific topography of a person describing something they were not going to describe further. She said instead, the Byzantine administrative infrastructure sounds like something I would have to copy-edit. Undoubtedly, he said, with extreme suffering. Is it that bad? It employs the word herewith 14 times in the first chapter, he said, and she laughed despite everything, an actual laugh, short and startled, and his eyes changed when she laughed. Not dramatically, a small shift, the particular shift of someone who has not heard a certain sound in a long time and has not realized until this moment that they had been listening for it. She filed this too. Another contraction. Longer this time. She made a sound against her will, low and involuntary, and gripped the edge of the table, and Ambrose was immediately present. Not fluttering, not alarmed, but close and steady, and he said, "Breathe, just breathe," in a voice so calm and certain it was almost architectural, like something you could lean against. She breathed. It passed. She became aware that his hand was on the table beside hers. Not on hers. Beside it. Close enough to take if she chose. She looked at it. The skin was cool. She could feel the temperature differential from inches away, and for a moment she found this strange, and then found it, for reasons she could not have articulated, very specifically comforting. She put her hand on top of his. He went very still. Not startled still. A different kind of stillness, controlled and deep, like something that had learned to hold its ground when it most wanted to move. His hand was cold. Genuinely cold. Not the cold of someone who had been outside, because he had not been outside. Not the cold of bad circulation or shock. Cold the way marble is cold. Cold in a way that had a constancy to it, a permanence, that she did not have the bandwidth to question right now, but that she was storing carefully in the part of her mind that would come back to things later. It helped. She did not know why. It helped the way ice helps, drawing the heat of pain toward itself. "You're cold," she said. "I am," he said. "Doesn't that bother you?" He seemed to think about this as if it were a philosophical question. "No," he said. "It has not bothered me for a very long time." She would have asked more, but then the sound of the ambulance came through the walls of the old house, and Ambrose stood and she saw. In the moment before he arranged his expression into its working configuration, something crossed his face. Not relief, precisely. Something more complicated. The look of a man who had been briefly permitted to be useful, and was now watching that permission expire. She stood too. Slowly. He offered his arm without a word. She took it. His arm was steady in the way that very old, very solid things are steady, and she gripped it all the way to the front door, and when he opened it onto the rain and the flashing lights, she turned to look at him one more time. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. The small, old-fashioned nod. The paramedics reached the step, and she transferred into their efficient, professional care, and Ambrose stepped back into the doorway, and she looked back once from the stretcher, and he was standing exactly where she had left him, the light from the hall making him a figure of gold and shadow in the open door, watching with that steady, unreadable regard. He lifted one hand. She did not know why this made her chest hurt. She thought, in the lurching, cramping, undignified back of the ambulance, that she would not see him again. That this was one of those encounters that cities produced sometimes, complete in themselves, a small sealed world that existed only in the specific coordinates of midnight and rain and a wrong door. That she would deliver her daughter, which, she knew, it was a daughter, had known for months, and call her sister in Portland, and begin the lengthy practical work of a life that had gone comprehensively off plan, and Ambrose Crane and his stopped clocks, and his Byzantine administrative infrastructure would become a story she told someday. The man who opened the door, she would say. And that would be all of it. She was, as she would later acknowledge, wrong about this. But that came later. First came the daughter. Her name was Clara. Nora decided this at 4:17 in the morning, in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and forced air, when the nurse placed the baby on her chest, and Clara opened her eyes for the first time, and looked at her mother, with the dark, unfocused gaze of someone who had arrived from a very great distance, and was not yet sure what they thought of the destination. "Clara," Nora said. "Hi." The baby said nothing, being 7 minutes old, but her fingers wrapped around Nora's with the automatic grip that Nora had been warned about and was not prepared for in any way that mattered. Her sister Maya arrived from Portland 2 days later. She came through the hospital room door with the expression of a woman who had been on a red eye and was furious and relieved in equal measure, and was going to be furious first because the relief was too large to lead with. "You were going to handle it," Maya said, setting down her bag and looking at Nora in the hospital bed and Clara in the plastic bassinet. "You said," and I quote, "I am going to handle it." "I handled it," Nora said. "You gave birth in a stranger's house. I gave birth in a hospital. The stranger was just the intermission." Maya looked at Clara. Her face did the thing faces do. The armor came off in one piece. "Oh," she said. "I know," Nora said. Maya sat down and held her niece, and Nora watched her sister and thought about the gap in their relationship. 5 years of distance assembled from a series of small failures of communication that had calcified into something that felt large, but turned out, apparently, to be the kind of thing that dissolved completely on contact with a newborn. Later, when Clara was asleep and the room was quiet, Maya said, "Tell me about the stranger." Nora had been waiting for this. "There's not much to tell," she said. "I knocked on the wrong door. He let me in. He was." She paused. "He was very calm. He made tea. He called the ambulance." "That's it?" "That's it." Maya looked at her. "You're leaving something out." "He was strange," Nora said. "In a way I can't describe exactly. Like someone who had been somewhere for a very long time. Not just the house, not just the city. Like he was old in a way that wasn't about age. That's extremely vague." "I know." She looked at the ceiling. He had stopped clocks. And sugar cubes. And he knew how I took my tea, without asking. Maya considered this. "That last one might actually be the most alarming," she said. Nora laughed. She had not laughed in 2 days, and it came out creaky and real, and Clara, in her bassinet, made a small sound like a punctuation mark. She did not go back. This was the plan, or rather, it became the plan in the way that plans do when you have a newborn and a borrowed room in your sister's apartment, and a life to reconstruct from its component parts. She had enough to manage, without adding anything to it. The mystery of Ambrose Crane and his cold hands and his old house could remain exactly what she had decided it was that night in the ambulance. A sealed, complete thing. A story with an ending already written. She lasted 9 days. On the 9th day, Maya was at work, and Clara was asleep in the portable bassinet that had arrived, unasked, from an online registry Nora had set up and then forgotten about, and Nora was sitting at Maya's kitchen table with a cup of tea and a silence that had settled over her like weather, and she found herself thinking, with the precise and involuntary focus of a copy editor who cannot leave a thing unresolved, about the ring on his left hand. Not a wedding ring. The wrong finger, the wrong style, old metal, worn smooth. The kind of ring you don't take off. She was not going back because of the ring. She was going back because she had not said thank you properly. This was what she told herself on the subway, Clara in the carrier against her chest, the April air coming through the doors at each stop. She had said thank you in the doorway at midnight, but that was not a proper thank you. That was the thanks you give someone reflexively, because the situation demands it, not because you have taken stock of what was done and what it cost and what the world looks like because of it. She owed him a proper thank you. That was all. Clara regarded the subway ceiling with the expression she had been wearing since birth, which was the expression of a very old philosopher who has heard this argument before and is not yet prepared to render judgment. The house on Mercer Street looked smaller in daylight. Older, the kind of old that is not shabby because it was built for permanence rather than appearance. The stone dark and solid, the windows deep set. There was a brass plate beside the door that was absent. She remembered noticing its absence the first time and not having the capacity to wonder about it. She knocked. 3 times. Even this time, which felt like a different kind of knock than the last. Nothing. She waited, and then felt the specific embarrassment of a woman standing on a front step in April with a baby in a carrier because she had told herself she was coming to say thank you, but was actually standing here because she was curious and possibly a little undone by sugar cubes, and she turned to go. The door opened. He looked the same. This struck her as noteworthy in a way she couldn't immediately explain. People looked different in daylight, usually, softer or harder than the version you'd constructed in a dim and panicked kitchen. He looked precisely the same as he had at midnight in the rain. Dark suit. Dark hair. The quality of stillness that she had not imagined. His eyes went from her face to Clara, and back. She could not read the expression on his face. The thing she would say later, trying to describe it to Maya, was that it was not one emotion. It was several, arriving in a sequence so rapid they almost overlapped. Something that crossed his face at the sight of the baby, brief and bright and almost immediately contained, like a window opened by accident and shut before the weather came in. Nora, he said. She had not told him her last name. He had remembered the first. Hi, she said. I came to say thank you. Properly, she looked at him, and also because I couldn't stop thinking about the stopped clock. A pause. Come in, he said. He made tea again. She had half expected this and was not prepared for how much comfort it brought, the specific ritual of it, the kettle and the cups and the complete absence of performance, like it was ordinary that she was here, like people came back. Clara was awake and conducting her ongoing philosophical survey of the world, which at this stage primarily meant staring at high-contrast shapes with the focus of a scholar examining primary sources. She had found the kitchen window, the dark frame against the bright April sky, and had decided it was worth her complete attention. He set the tea down and looked at Clara for a moment. She's well, he said. She's 9 days old, Nora said. She seems extremely well. She has opinions about ceilings. He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted, very slightly. She favors you, he said. Nora looked at Clara, the dark hair, the set of the eyes, the small mouth already arranged in a line of focused concentration. Her father has very light hair, she said. The observation came out neutral, a fact, but she heard the architecture of it, the shape of what was not being said. He heard it too. She could tell because he did not react to it, and that stillness was a kind of response. She looked around the kitchen in daylight. It looked exactly as it had at midnight. She had expected the daylight to change it, to reveal it as ordinary, to reduce the amber warmth of that night to something smaller. Instead, it looked as if no time had passed at all, as if the kitchen existed in a slightly different relationship to time than the rest of the world. You haven't changed anything, she said. No reason to, he said. Since when? He was quiet for a moment. I reupholstered the chairs in 1987, he said. It was necessary. She looked at the chairs. They looked old. Very old. What did they look like before? She said. He appeared to consider this. Victorian, he said. I had been meaning to do something about them since approximately 1960, and then it became a matter of principle. She stared at him. He met her look with the calm of a man who had said something perfectly normal. That's, she said, and then stopped, and picked up her tea, and looked at the window where Clara was still conducting her investigation. She had been a copy editor for 8 years. She was good at her job because she had a certain tolerance for ambiguity, the ability to sit with something unresolved and keep working until the answer revealed itself from within the text rather than being imposed from outside. She did not require everything to be explained immediately. She required honesty, eventually, she said. Can I ask you something direct? You may ask me anything directly. How old are you? The pause that followed was the longest she had encountered so far. Not discomfort, not evasion. The pause of a man deciding where to put something down carefully. Old, he said. That's not a number. No, Ambrose. He looked at her across the table. His dark eyes were serious and steady, and full of something she had been trying to name since midnight 9 days ago. It was not sadness. It was not loneliness, exactly, though there was something in that vicinity. It was the quality of very long duration. The specific expression of a man who had been somewhere for so long that the being there had become a thing in itself. Not a circumstance, but a character, written into him at a level that was not on the surface. Older than the chairs, he said, much older than 1960. Yes, than the house. Yes, she looked at him. He looked back. She said, the stopped clock in the hall, the one that says 1743 on the face. He said nothing. You said you hadn't restarted it because of a friend. A clockmaker who died. Yes, that clock has been stopped for 280 years. Yes, and you said you had been meaning to replace the chairs since approximately 1960. Yes, and you said in this city longer than 17 years, like it was an understatement. He was very still. She thought about the cold, the specific quality of it, not the cold of illness or exposure, but the cold of something with its own internal temperature, consistent and permanent. Like stone, like the deep ground below the frost line where the temperature never changes regardless of the season above it. She thought about the way people in the bar, 9 days ago, had moved out of his path before they saw him. She thought about the way he had heard her breathing change on a front step through a closed door in the rain. She thought about the ring on his left hand, dark metal, very old, worn smooth. She put both hands flat on the table. Tell me, she said. He was quiet for a long moment. Not the deciding pause. Something deeper. The pause of a man standing at the edge of something he has not stood at for a very long time. Clara made a small sound, a contented sound, the sound of a person who has found the ceiling entirely satisfactory and is prepared to file a positive report. Ambrose looked at her. The window opened again, briefly, that quick bright thing behind his eyes. "She is," he said quietly, and did not finish the sentence. He seemed to have surprised himself. "She is what?" Nora said. He looked at Clara for another moment. "Very new," he said. The way he said it was not simple. It had weight. The particular weight of someone who has not been near something new in a long time, who had forgotten the specific gravity of it. Nora watched his face. She made a decision. She reached across the table and turned his left hand over, palm up, gently, the way you turn a document over to read the verso. He let her. His hand was cool and still in hers, and she looked at the ring on his finger, and then at the inside of his wrist where a pulse should have been. The skin was smooth, still, marble still. She held his wrist for 10 seconds. "Nothing." She set his hand down. She looked at him. He looked back. She said, "I'm going to need you to tell me everything. Not because I'm afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm an editor. I need the full manuscript, not just the first chapter." His mouth moved. Not quite a smile. The ghost of something that might have been a smile if it remembered how. She thought it might be the most remarkable thing she had seen in a long time. "Where?" he said carefully. "Would you like me to begin?" She picked up her tea. "From the beginning," she said. He looked at her with those ancient, careful eyes, and Clara murmured contentedly at the window, and the kitchen held them in its amber warmth, and Ambrose Crane, who had not told anyone the beginning in 400 years, opened his mouth and started to speak. He was born in 1319, he told her, in a village in the English Midlands that no longer existed by any name she would recognize, a scatter of houses around a mill on a river that had since been dammed, diverted, and renamed. He was the second son of a wool merchant, which meant he was the son who learned to read, because the first son would inherit the business and the second son needed something else to offer the world. What he offered the world, for the first 20 years of it, was letters. He wrote them for people who could not, correspondence and contracts, and once a letter for a woman in the village to her brother in Bruges that took 3 sessions to compose, because she kept changing what she wanted to say, and Ambrose kept writing it down anyway, because the changing was the real letter, the one that said what she actually meant under what she thought she should say. He stopped. "You were a scribe," Nora said. "Something like that," he said, "for a time." She was watching him with the focused quiet she had, the attentiveness of someone who processed language for a living, and understood that the space around words was as significant as the words themselves. "And then," she said. "And then, I was 23, he said, and I met someone." He paused. "Not like that," he said. "Not a love story. Or not that kind. What kind?" He looked at the ring on his hand, the kind where you agree to something you don't fully understand, because the person offering it is very compelling, and the alternative is dying of a fever in a village that smells of wet wool, and you are 23, and you have read enough to know that the world is larger than the river, and you have not yet seen any of it. She did not say anything. She let the silence be what it was. He told her about the fever first. He had been ill for 2 weeks, the kind of illness that in 1342 had only one direction, and he had made his peace with it in the particular way of someone who has had time to think, and has decided that thinking about it too much is not useful. He told her about the woman who came to the house. He described her with precision, as he described everything, the dark clothing, the quality of her stillness which he had recognized in himself later and not before, the way she had looked at him in the bed with an assessment that was not unkind, but was entirely honest. "I can offer you a different path," she had said. The exact words, Nora noted, after 700 years. "And you said yes," Nora said. "I asked what it cost first," he said. She almost smiled. "That sounds like you." He looked at her. Something in his expression registered that she almost smiled and held it. She said the cost was everything ordinary. He continued. Every ordinary thing. The fever, yes, the dying, yes, but also the eating, the sleeping, the warmth, the growing old, the not outliving everyone. He paused. I thought I understood what that meant, he said. I did not understand what that meant. She looked at his hands on the table. She said, Have you outlived many people? He was quiet for a long moment. Yes, he said. She nodded. She did not offer sympathy in the shape of words, because she understood, from the way he said it, that the yes contained multitudes that did not want to be excavated right now, and that the most respectful thing she could do was let it stand. She asked instead, The court. Percival mentioned a court. He blinked. He had not expected that pivot. You knew Percival? He said. I didn't. But you mentioned him once. When you were on the phone with the ambulance, you said something about. She paused. I should tell Percival. And then you stopped and made the call. I wasn't sure I'd heard it right. He looked at her. You were in significant pain, he said. I was. I'm a very focused person. She looked at Clara. She gets it from me. Something moved through his expression. Percival, he said, is my. He paused. He has been with me since 1601, he said. He began as what you might call a household manager, and has evolved over 4 centuries into something that has no exact contemporary title. He manages the court, the legal frameworks, the administrative necessities of governing a community of people who require governance, and also apparently require someone to make sure I respond to correspondence within a reasonable century. Governing, she said. There are, he said carefully, others like me. Not many. Communities of them, in most large cities. Someone must negotiate the terms of our existence, the maintenance of secrecy, the resolution of disputes, the agreements that keep things stable. It falls. Through a combination of age and lineage, and what I can only describe as being the last one standing after a very long meeting, to me. You're in charge, she said. I am responsible, he said, which is not exactly the same thing, and contains considerably more paperwork. She looked at him. You're a vampire king, she said, and she said it the way she might say you're the deputy editor, matter of fact and mildly impressed, and not remotely surprised. He said nothing. She said, I'm going to need a moment. Take whatever you need. She looked at Clara, who had finished with the ceiling and was now asleep against her chest with the boneless, absolute surrender of a baby who has decided the world can wait. She looked at the kitchen. She looked at her tea. She said, Does Percival know I came back? No, he said. She nodded. He'll find out, she said. Inevitably, he said. How will he react? He considered this for a moment with genuine seriousness. He will be, he said, quietly insufferable about it. He has been suggesting for approximately 60 years that I should attempt to reconnect with the world in some capacity. He will view this as vindication, and he will not express this directly, which will be worse. She said, He sounds like my sister. He said, They would get along very well, which is a genuinely alarming thought, and she laughed. And it happened again, the small shift in his expression, the window opening on that brief warm light, and this time he did not close it quite as fast. This time, he let it stay open for a moment. Just a moment. But she saw it. She came back the following Thursday, and the Thursday after that, it became, without either of them formally deciding it had become anything, a Thursday arrangement. She would arrive at 2 in the afternoon, when Clara's longest nap overlapped with Ambrose's tolerance for daylight, which was not 0 but was, she was learning, effortful in the specific way that things are effortful when they require sustained management rather than being naturally comfortable. He always had tea ready. She did not comment on this. He always had the chairs turned slightly toward each other rather than parallel to the table, which was such a small adjustment and so consistent that she noticed it on the third Thursday and decided it was the most telling thing she had observed about him yet. He was preparing for conversation. He had been preparing for it, she suspected, since the previous Thursday ended, in the way that people prepare for things they will not admit they want. Percival appeared on the fourth Thursday. He arrived in the hallway as she was hanging up her coat, a tall man in a charcoal waistcoat with the angular face of a portrait and the expression of someone who has been practicing neutral and is not entirely succeeding. "Miss Elliot," he said. What a genuine and complete surprise. Nora looked at him. He had the specific quality of British restraint stretched very thin over something that appeared to be uncontainable. "Percival," she said. He inclined his head. His eyes went to Clara in the carrier and did the thing Ambrose's eyes did, the quick internal weather event, and then recovered to professional composure. "She is," he said, "very small. She's 2 weeks old. Indeed, a pause. She has your expression, does she?" "The one," he said carefully, "that suggests information is being filed for future use." Nora smiled. Percival appeared to find this deeply gratifying in a way he was too dignified to express. He stayed for tea. He did not pretend this was incidental. He sat at the table with his cup and his precise posture and his 4 centuries of earned composure, and talked to Nora about the house, about the neighborhood, about the city in 1987 when the chairs had been reupholstered, and what Mercer Street had looked like then, and what it looked like now. He did not talk about Ambrose. He talked around Ambrose with the practiced art of someone who had been doing it for a very long time, describing contexts without centers, until she understood that this was its own kind of communication, that the shape of what he was not saying was the message, that Percival was building her a picture of a man who had been alone for a long time in a specific way, not the dramatic alone of someone who had given up, but the quiet alone of someone who had decided that the arithmetic of loss no longer justified the risk of caring. She asked, later, after Percival had left, how long since someone had been in this kitchen. He said, "In what capacity?" "In the capacity of someone who comes back." A pause. "A long time," he said. She nodded. Clara woke and made her alert sound, which was a brief ascending noise like a question, and Ambrose, who had been sitting very still at the other end of the table, looked at her. "Can I?" he said, and stopped. She had never heard him stop mid-sentence. He said things fully formed, always, the way people do when they have had centuries to learn how sentences work. He stopped. She looked at him. His face had the expression it had when he looked at the window, or at the stopped clock, or at the ring on his hand. The particular expression of someone in the vicinity of something they had decided not to want. "Can you hold her?" Nora said. He looked at her. "I don't know if that's," he said. "She's a baby," Nora said. "Not a test." She picked Clara up and crossed the kitchen and held her out. He took her. He held her with the careful precision of a man doing something very new, and also with an instinctive steadiness that had nothing to do with practice, and everything to do with 700 years of knowing exactly how much pressure any given thing could bear. Clara looked up at him. He looked down at her. He did not say anything. She was not sure he was capable of saying anything at that specific moment. He was very still, and Clara was very small against his chest, and the light from the kitchen window came in at an angle that made everything in the room look the way old paintings look, warm and permanent, and slightly suspended from ordinary time. Nora sat back down and picked up her tea and said nothing. She understood that some things did not require commentary. He held Clara for a long time. Clara fell back asleep. He looked up eventually and found Nora watching him, and his expression, the unguarded version, the one that lived underneath the court training, was so raw and so undefended that she looked down at her cup because she did not want him to feel observed. She heard him exhale, not the careful, managed exhale of a man who breathes because the situation requires it, a real one, the kind that releases something. She said to the teacup, "She likes you." He said, "After a long moment I find that," and then he stopped again. "Extraordinary," he finished. Quietly, she smiled at the cup. "She is," she said. He looked down at Clara again. She asked him, that afternoon, about the woman on the front step. Not romantically. She was not asking about the circumstances of what she was beginning to think of as her accidental midnight admission to his life. She was asking something she had been forming in her mind since the fourth Thursday. She said, "Why haven't you done this before? Let someone in. Not just the door." This, he was quiet for the length of 2 of Clara's sleeping breaths. "Because it ends," he said. "Always, it ends, and the next one ends, and the one after that ends, and at some point the arithmetic becomes very clear." She said, "And yet." He looked at her. She said, "You opened the door." He looked down at the baby asleep against his chest. "I heard you on the step," he said. "I told you. I was already in the hall. That doesn't answer the question." "No," he said. He was quiet for a moment. "You were trying not to make a sound," he said, "and you couldn't quite manage it. And there was something in that. In the trying and the not quite managing." He paused. "I found it very..." He stopped. "Human," she offered. He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "Exactly that." She thought about this for a moment. She said, "The arithmetic doesn't change, you know. Just because you don't open the door." He said nothing. She said, "It still ends either way. You just don't get the part in the middle." He looked at Clara sleeping against him. "She is going to be," he said slowly, "extremely opinionated." "Yes," Nora agreed, "based purely on existing data. She gets it from her mother." "Undoubtedly," he said, and the edge of something that had been built up over 700 years of careful not wanting shifted. Not collapsed, but shifted. 1 degree, the way glaciers shift, imperceptibly and permanently. Spring moved into summer, and the Thursdays continued. Percival stopped pretending they were a surprise, and began instead leaving out an extra cup before she arrived, which was, she understood, the maximum expression of enthusiasm his dignity would permit. Clara grew. This was the thing that altered the kitchen most. The thing that made the stopped clocks and the old books and the permanent amber warmth of the room accumulate meaning in a way they had not before. Clara grew, and the room absorbed it, the way rooms do when they are genuinely inhabited rather than merely occupied. And slowly, very slowly, the kitchen on Mercer Street began to have the quality of a place where time was being spent rather than endured. Ambrose watched her grow with an attention that was both careful and helpless. Nora saw this and did not comment on it directly because she had learned, by now, the geometry of when to speak and when to let the silence be. She was also learning other things. She was learning that he read everything, that the 4,000 books were not an accumulation but a practice, that he read the way she edited, precisely and with full attention, and that he had opinions about manuscripts that were 700 years in the making and occasionally maddening. She was learning that he was funny in the specific way of people who are not trying to be funny, that the dry precision of his observations produced more genuine laughter than anything she had encountered in years of people attempting humor, and that he was always slightly surprised when this happened, the small shift in his eyes at the sound of her laughing, like someone who keeps being startled by the same good thing. She was learning the stopped clocks. There were 3 of them in the house. She had found the second in the library, stopped at 11:40 in what appeared to be the morning of some otherwise ordinary day, and the third in the upstairs hallway, stopped at 8:15, the glass dusty and undisturbed. She had not asked about any of them except the one in the entrance hall. She asked about the library clock on a Thursday in June when the windows were open, and Clara was in a portable seat on the kitchen floor, conducting an experiment with a wooden spoon she had recently discovered and was finding broadly satisfactory. He was quiet for a while. 1891, he said. The clock in the library. Was there a person? There is always a person, he said. With the clocks. He looked at the window. The library clock belonged to a woman who had been a physicist in a time when women in physics were a theoretical concept rather than a practical reality. She had been brilliant and difficult, and had died of pneumonia at 42 in this house, in the library, surrounded by her papers. He stopped. She had been working on a problem for the last 3 years of her life, he said. I never knew if she solved it. She never told me, and I never found the papers. Nora said, Have you looked? He looked at her. For the papers. He said, The boxes in the basement I have not opened. She looked at him for a long moment. She said, I am a professional at looking at old documents. He said, The basement has not been organized since 1924. She said, I edit legal texts. I once spent 4 days reconstructing a contract that had been through a flood. I am not afraid of your basement. He said, You have a 10-week-old daughter. Clara hit the floor with the wooden spoon and produced a sound of deep personal satisfaction. She is clearly available, Nora said. He looked at Clara. He looked at Nora. He said, You don't have to do this. She said, I know. Why then? She said, Because you've been sitting with an unanswered question for 130 years, and that seems like a very long time to wonder. She paused. And because I'm curious. And because you made me tea 9 times, and I haven't done anything useful in return. He said, You don't owe me anything. She said, I know that too. They went to the basement on a Saturday. Percival, upon being informed of the project, produced archival gloves from somewhere that suggested he had been anticipating this moment and had been quietly preparing for several weeks. He did not say this. He said, I happened to have these and left it there. The basement was, as advertised, not organized since 1924. It was also, in the way of old basements belonging to very old men, a document of everything he had kept. Boxes labeled in 3 different handwriting styles spanning centuries. Trunks with brass latches worn smooth. A set of shelves holding objects she would have spent days cataloging if she had the time and did not have a baby in a carrier on her chest who was treating the entire expedition as a sensory event of considerable interest. She found the boxes from 1891 near the far wall. He stood behind her while she went through them, not hovering but present, and she understood from the quality of his stillness that this was a different stillness than the usual one, not the managed composure of a man in his court, something with more exposure in it. She took her time. The papers were in remarkable condition for their age, the way things are when they have been kept in the right temperature by someone who did not know they were preserving them, but happened to live in a house that stayed consistently cool. She found the problem first. 3 pages of notation that she could not follow specifically, but could recognize in structure, the shape of a thing being built toward a resolution that was not yet there. She found the resolution 20 minutes later, at the bottom of the second box, on a single sheet in a handwriting that was different from the earlier pages, smaller, compressed, the handwriting of someone who is very tired and writing quickly because the idea is there and must be captured. She sat back. On her heels, she looked at it for a long time. Then she looked up at Ambrose. His expression was doing the complicated thing. She solved it, Nora said. He came closer and crouched beside her and looked at the paper with the careful precision of someone who had once been a scribe and still read documents the way they were meant to be read, slowly and completely. He was very still for a long time. Yes, he said. One word. But the weight of it was the weight of 130 years of not knowing. Set down. She wanted to say something equal to the moment. She was a person who worked with words, and she could not find any that were not smaller than what was needed. She handed him the paper. He took it with both hands. He held it. She picked up Clara, who had decided the basement had offered sufficient stimulation and was ready to register her opinion about this in a vocal capacity, and she carried her back upstairs and made tea. And when Ambrose came up 20 minutes later, he was holding the paper with the careful automatic handling of someone who had been doing it unconsciously. The way you hold a thing that matters without thinking about whether you are holding it. He sat down at the table. The paper was on the table in front of him. Nora poured his tea. She sat down across from him. She said nothing. He said, after a long while, "Thank you." And the way he said it was not the reflexive thank you of a man responding to a kindness. It was the specific thank you of a man who has been given back something he had stopped expecting to find. She said, "She was lucky to have you." He looked at the paper. "I was lucky to know her," he said. And he said it without modification, without the careful management of centuries. Simply, plainly, as a true thing. Clara put her hand on the edge of the table and held it there with the grip she had not lost since birth, the automatic fierce hold of someone who has decided this is worth keeping. Nora watched Ambrose look at her daughter's hand. She watched the window open in his face. This time, she thought, he might not close it. The crisis came on a Tuesday, in September. It came the way crises do in lives that have achieved a fragile functional stability, from a direction she had not been watching, because she had been watching all the other directions. Her landlord called at 9 in the morning. Maya had been subletting her apartment to Nora at below market rate since January, a kindness that Nora had understood was temporary, but had permitted herself to stop thinking about daily because thinking about it daily was not compatible with also feeding a baby and copy editing a manuscript on the decline of Portuguese maritime law and trying to rebuild a life from its scattered components. The landlord was not calling about her. He was calling Maya, and Maya was at work, and Nora answered because the number was the building's number, and she thought it might be about the front door intercom that had been broken since March. He was selling the building. The conversation was professional and not unkind, and contained phrases like "we will of course honor the existing lease through its current term, and adequate notice will be provided," but underneath those phrases was a very clear and practical reality, which was that the end of the lease was December, which was 3 months away. And December in New York with an 8-month-old and a copy editor's income was a specific kind of mathematics. She sat at Maya's kitchen table after she hung up. She did not cry. She had, since January, developed a very precise relationship with her own capacity for despair. She could see it clearly. She could describe it. She had decided, somewhere around month 4, that she was only going to pick it up when it was absolutely necessary, and that this was not yet that moment. She called Maya. Maya was characteristically direct about it, which meant she said, "We'll figure it out 4 times, and I'm not worried once, and 1 don't you dare blame yourself," which was not what Nora had said, but was what she had been thinking. She did not call Ambrose. This was a decision she was aware of making. She examined it the way she examined things she decided, which was carefully and honestly. She did not call him because calling him felt like a thing she could not calibrate. Because the Thursdays had become something she had stopped being able to describe to herself with the word casual and had not yet found a different word for. Because she was afraid of needing something from him in a way that changed what it was. She came on Thursday. She came because not coming would have required an explanation or an absence that would have needed its own navigation, and she had decided that avoidance was not a thing she could afford. She came, and she was quieter than usual, and she sat at the table and held her tea with both hands. and talked about Clara and the Portuguese maritime law manuscript, and did not say anything about the building. He did not ask. But she could feel, in the quality of his attention, which was a physical thing by now, something she could read the room by, that he had noticed the difference. After an hour, he said, "What happened?" She looked at her tea. "Nothing," she said. He waited. She said, "Something. It's practical. It's manageable." He said nothing. She said, "My sister's building is being sold. The lease ends in December. I need to find somewhere to live." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How long have you known?" She looked up. "Since Tuesday," she said. "This is Thursday," he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. The expression on his face was not what she expected. Not sympathy in the shape it usually came in, the soft managed concern of someone calculating their involvement. It was something more direct than that. A kind of clear attention, focused and steady. The look of a man who has made a decision and is making sure the other person knows it. He said, "There is a flat above this house. It has been empty since 1988 because I have not needed it, and I have not thought about it particularly, but it has a bedroom and a room that could be a second bedroom and a kitchen that Percival will tell you is functional, and I will tell you is not what he means by functional, but contains the necessary appliances." She stared at him. He said, "I am not offering it as a convenience. I am offering it because you need somewhere, and I have somewhere, and you have spent 9 months coming to this kitchen, and I have." He paused. "I have come to prefer Thursdays," he said very carefully, "to every other day of the week." She looked at him for a long time. She said, "Ambrose," he said, "I'm aware of what I'm saying." She said, "Are you?" He said, "I am 700 years old. I am perhaps the least likely person in this city to speak carelessly." She looked at Clara in the seat on the floor, who was chewing a teething ring with the focused commitment of someone for whom this was the primary project of the afternoon. She said, "This would change things." He said, "Yes," she said. "And you understand that I'm—" She stopped. "That Clara and I are—" She stopped again. "That this is not a small—" He said, "I have been alive for 7 centuries. I am familiar with the weight of decisions." She said, "I don't want it to be practical. I don't want it to be the housing situation." He met her eyes. He said, quietly, "It is not the housing situation." The kitchen was very quiet. Clara dropped the teething ring. The sound of it hitting the floor was the loudest thing in the room. Ambrose looked at Nora across the table, and his face was the unguarded version, the one underneath the king and the centuries and the managed composure, the face of a man who had been very still for a very long time, and was choosing now, deliberately and with full knowledge of the cost, to stop being still. She said, "I need to talk to Maya." He said, "Of course." She said, "And I need to see the flat." He said, "Percival will be delighted to arrange that, and will be extremely restrained about it, which will be its own kind of loud." She almost smiled. He said, "Take whatever time you need." She said, "I will." She stood up to go, and she stopped in the doorway of the kitchen and looked back at him sitting at the old table in the amber light, and she said, "For what it's worth, I prefer Thursdays too." He said nothing. But the window opened in his face, wide this time, and stayed. The flat was, as Percival had said, functional. It was also, as Ambrose had said, not what Percival meant by functional, in that the kitchen appliances appeared to have been installed during a period when functional meant they had been connected to electricity and no further questions had been asked. But the ceilings were high, and the floors were old wood that had survived everything, and the light in the main room in the morning came through 2 tall windows and landed on the floor in rectangles that moved slowly across the boards as the day progressed. And the room that could be a second bedroom looked onto a tree in the back garden that Ambrose said had been there since 1780, which Nora believed immediately and completely. Clara sat in her carrier on the floor and looked at the light rectangles with profound satisfaction. "She is," Percival said from the doorway, conducting an assessment. "She finds it acceptable," Nora said. Percival's composure was a thin membrane. "How marvelous," he said, in the tone of someone for whom marvelous was a significant understatement. Maya came to see it on a Saturday. She walked through the rooms with the systematic attention of a woman who had once minored in architecture before switching to environmental policy, and still moved through spaces like she was grading them. She looked at the ceilings. She tested the windows. She opened the kitchen appliances and made the face. Then she stood in the main room in the morning light and looked out at the garden. "You like him," she said. "It's complicated," Nora said. "You like him," Maya said again. "He's 700 years old. That's not an answer to what I said." Nora looked at the tree in the garden, the old tree with its roots that went down into the earth the way Ambrose's roots went down into centuries, deep and settled and past the point where anything ordinary could shift them. "He makes tea," she said. "He held Clara for 2 hours the first time I let him and didn't say a word." Maya looked at her. He found something a physicist hid in 1891, and it mattered to him for 130 years, she said. He called 1987 recent when he was talking about the chairs. Maya said, "The chairs. The chairs that took him since 1960 to reupholster." Maya appeared to be doing arithmetic. "He's strange," Nora said. "He's the strangest person I've ever met, and also the most." She looked for the word. "Consistent. He's been the same person for 700 years, and I can see all of it, layered, when he talks. All of it at once." Maya looked at her for a long time. Then she said, "Is he good to Clara?" "Yes," Nora said, without qualification. Maya nodded. She said, "Then take the flat." She said it the way Maya said things that had already been decided, the way their mother had said things that were obvious to everyone involved, the particular family cadence of a woman cutting through to what mattered. She moved in on a Friday in October. Percival had sourced boxes from somewhere that suggested he had known this was coming. Ambrose carried everything up the stairs in 2 trips, which she would have questioned more if she hadn't already watched him pick up a set of Victorian bookshelves with the focused ease of a man moving a paperback. She stood in the empty main room after the last box was up and looked at the light on the floor and listened to the house. The house was quiet. Below her, she knew, there was a kitchen with a heavy oak table and a clock that worked, and a man who had opened a door at midnight in the rain because he heard the sound of someone trying very hard not to need anything. Above her, she heard nothing but the deep particular silence of a house that was old enough to have absorbed a great many things and found them all acceptable. Clara was asleep. She unpacked slowly, placing things with the attention she gave to documents, each object in the location where it would be useful and would stay. She was a person with systems. She had always been a person with systems. The systems had not survived the last year entirely intact, but the instinct remained, the desire to know where things were, to establish the infrastructure of a life before living it. She put Clara's things in the small room with the tree window. She put her books in the main room in the order she had always kept them, which was not alphabetical, and not by genre but by a system that made complete sense to her, and no sense to anyone else, which she considered a feature. She made the bed. She stood in the kitchen and filled the kettle, which was a kettle she had bought specifically for this kitchen, and which worked correctly, and did not have the expression of an appliance that had been connected in a different era, and had been confused ever since. A knock came at the door. 3 times even, she opened it. Ambrose was standing in the hallway holding a small object wrapped in cloth. He said, "A housewarming gift," and then appeared to find the phrase awkward. "Given the house." She said, "It's still a house." He said, "Technically the same house, which had been bothering me." She said, "Give me the gift, Ambrose." He held it out. She unwrapped it. It was a clock. Small, old, beautiful, in a dark wood case, and when she held it, she could hear it ticking. The clean, precise sound of a mechanism maintained with attention over a very long time. She looked up at him. He said, "It was made in 1834 by a clockmaker in Paris. It has kept accurate time for 190 years. It has never stopped." She said, "Unlike the others." He said, "Unlike the others." She looked at it. The small hand moved with the unhurried certainty of something that had been given one job and had been doing it faithfully ever since. She said, "You kept this one running." He said, "I kept this one running." The way he said it contained something she did not have the word for yet, but that she understood in the specific register of a person who works with language and knows when a sentence means more than its words. She said, "Thank you." He said, it seemed appropriate. "For a new room." She said, "Will you come in?" He looked at her. He said, "You don't have to. If you need the evening to." She said, "I'm asking you in, Ambrose." He came in. He stood in the main room and looked at her books in their system he could not read, but that he did not try to decode, simply acknowledged as hers. And he looked at the light fading on the floor, and at Clara's door ajar down the hall, and at the clock she had set on the window ledge already, because it looked correct there. She made tea in the new kitchen. He sat at the new table. The room was quiet, in the way that new rooms are quiet when they are in the process of becoming something. She brought the tea and sat across from him, and they were quiet together in the way they had learned to be quiet, the way that had a texture to it, a quality of shared attention that did not require filling. After a while she said, "How long has it been since someone lived up here?" He said, "Since 1988. She said, "And before that?" He said, "Various people over the years. A painter for 12 years in the 40s, a musicologist in the 70s who played piano badly and continuously." She said, "Did it bother you?" He said, "The piano?" "The people," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "Eventually, always," she nodded. He said, "But the quiet afterward bothered me more." "I didn't realize that until now." She looked at him. He looked back. The clock on the window ledge ticked steadily between them, the only clock in the house doing what it was meant to do, marking the time as it passed rather than the time it had stopped. And she thought that this was perhaps the most honest thing he had ever given her. Not the absence of loss, not a promise that it wouldn't cost what everything cost, just a clock that was still running. Clara said her first word in November. It was not Mama. Nora had been prepared for this possibility by every book she had read on the subject, all of which noted that Mama was not always first, that first words were unpredictable, that language arrived on its own schedule regardless of frequency or encouragement. She had not been specifically prepared for the word to be bros, which was Clara's version of Ambrose, produced on a Tuesday morning when Nora carried her downstairs at 7:30 and Ambrose, who had been returning from whatever the night required of him, opened the door from the street at precisely the same moment, and Clara saw him and said, with absolute clarity and apparent satisfaction, "Bros." He stopped in the doorway. He looked at Clara. His face did not do the complicated thing. The complicated thing was for situations the emotion was too large for. His face did something simpler, something with no composure in it at all. Just a man standing in a doorway, looking at a 10-month-old who had decided he was worth a word. Nora said, looking at his expression, "Well, I suppose that settles it." He said, "I'm not certain what it settles." She said, "Whether or not you count." She paused. "You count." He looked at her. Clara said bros again, with the emphasis of someone establishing a position. The days had taken on a shape. This was the thing she noticed first, in the early weeks of living above him, that the days had a shape they had not had since before. Not a rigid shape, not the shape of something forced, but the organic shape of days that know what they're organized around. Mornings she would hear him in the kitchen below, which she heard not as a disturbance, but as a kind of gravity, a proof of weight. Afternoons she spent working at the table by the window while Clara slept, the manuscript pages accumulating alongside the sounds of the city coming through the glass. Thursdays they still had tea in his kitchen, but now sometimes it was also Mondays, and sometimes it was just her going down, because Clara was awake and wanted the light in his library, which was different from the light upstairs in a way that Clara had strong feelings about. He came up on Thursday evenings sometimes. She made dinner. He did not eat it, and had stopped pretending any intention to eat it, which she had decided was the most comfortable arrangement, and he sat at her table, and they talked while she ate, and Clara occupied herself with progressively complex experiments in object permanence. Percival came to dinner once and ate everything with the precise appreciation of someone who had kept the skill for 4 centuries and was glad it remained useful. He told her, over dessert, quietly while Ambrose was in the other room with Clara, that in 400 years he had not seen his king sit at a table like that. Not with that quality. Like what? She asked. Like someone who knows where he is, Percival said. Like someone who is not already calculating the distance to the door. She looked toward the other room. She could hear Ambrose's voice, low and even, narrating something to Clara, who was too young for narrative but received it with complete attention, the way she received everything Ambrose offered, as though she understood that he was someone who did not give things without meaning them. She said to Percival, "Does it worry you?" He considered this with the seriousness it deserved. He said, "The ending worries me. As it always does. What you are worries me less than anything has in a very long time." She said, "Because," he said, "because you are not afraid of the arithmetic." He paused. Most people, when they understand the arithmetic, become afraid of it. You looked at it and kept coming to Thursday. She said, "I'm not brave about it. I just decided that not coming to Thursday was its own kind of loss." He said, "Yes, that is what I mean." In December, Ambrose told her about Marguerite. He did not offer it. She asked because she had found, in the basement during a second expedition with proper archival supplies, a small painting wrapped in wool and stored in a box that had been sealed and was older than anything else in the basement. She had not opened the box. She had recognized the shape of something that was not hers to open, and had left it, and waited, and finally, on a Thursday in December when the city was loud with winter, and Clara was asleep, and the kitchen was warm, she said, "There's a painting in a box in the basement." He was very still. She said, "I didn't open it. I want you to know I didn't open it." He said, "I know." She said, "You don't have to tell me." He said, "I want to." He told her about Marguerite the way he told her all the things that mattered, slowly and precisely, and with the specific honesty of someone who has decided that if they are going to say a thing, they are going to say it true. She had lived in the 1600s. She had been in his life for 20 years, and she had died in the way people died in the 1600s, which was without warning, and without recourse, and without anything adequate to say about it afterward. He said, "I kept the painting because I could not keep her." He paused. "And then I kept it because I could not look at it and I could not throw it away, and that became a position that hardened over time into something I stopped examining." She said, "And now?" He said, "And now I have been thinking that a painting in a sealed box in a basement is not a memorial. It is an avoidance." She looked at him. He said, "I do not want to spend another century avoiding things." She said, "Is that new?" He said, "Yes." She said, "Because of?" He looked at her. He said, "Because I come upstairs on Thursday evenings and there is a person eating dinner who is genuinely annoyed by passive voice in legal manuscripts, and a child who knows my name, and a clock on the window ledge. And I think that I have been confusing the pain of ending with the problem of beginning, and I have been wrong about this for a very long time. She was quiet for a moment. She said, "That's the most romantic thing you've said to me." He said, "I was describing a logical error." She said, "I know." He said, "That's romantic?" She said, "To me it is." He looked at her across the table. She looked back. Clara said bros from the other room. Not urgently. The sound of someone confirming that the world was still correctly arranged. Nora stood up. She crossed the kitchen. She stopped in front of him. She put her hand on the side of his face. His skin was cool. It was always cool. 15 degrees. A wine cellar. A marble countertop. A January window. She had stopped noticing this the way you stop noticing the weight of something you have been carrying long enough. He went very still. She said, "I am not afraid of the arithmetic." He said, "I know." She said, "I'm not afraid of you." He said, very quietly, "That has not stopped being the most terrifying thing anyone has said to me." She almost smiled. She was very close, and she could see every part of his face. The 700 years of it. The 23-year-old who had wanted to see more of the world, and the man who had seen so much of it he had stopped being able to look at paintings. The man who kept clocks stopped, and basements sealed, and chairs unupholstered for 30 years, because everything required the decision to begin. She said, "Begin." He said, "What?" She said, "That's what you're trying to decide." She held his face between her hands. "Begin. I'm here. Clara's here. The clock is running. Begin." He closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were very close to something she did not have a name for and did not need one. He said, "Yes." One word. Complete. And the kitchen held them in its warmth, and the clock on the window ledge above ticked steadily through the floor, and Clara said bros once more, and Nora thought that this was what ordinary looked like when you let it in. Warm and imperfect, and absolutely stubbornly magnificently alive. The cafe had not changed. Nora sat at the corner table with a tea she had been holding long enough that it had crossed the boundary from warm into something more philosophical, and she watched the door the way she had learned to watch things, with attention and without urgency. Clara was with Maya today. This had been arranged with the specific efficiency of two sisters who had figured out, in the past year, how to be in each other's lives with less friction and more directness, which was what happened when the circumstances became large enough that the old habits of avoidance became simply impractical. Ambrose came through the door at precisely 10 o'clock. He moved through the room the way he always moved, with the unhurried economy of someone who had long ago stopped needing to perform arrival, and the people around him shifted without knowing why, the unconscious choreography of a room rearranging itself around something older than itself. He sat down across from her. He looked at her tea. "You've been holding that long enough that I can tell you the temperature from here," he said. She said, "Good morning to you too." "Good morning," he said. "Why are we here?" She had asked him to meet her. She had said, "The cafe, 10 o'clock, without explanation," which was not her usual mode, and he had come without asking why, which was not nothing. She said, "I wanted to meet somewhere neutral." He said, "My kitchen is neutral." She said, "Your kitchen is your kitchen. I wanted somewhere that belonged to neither of us." He looked at her. She said, "I want to ask you something." He said, "Ask." She put her tea down. She said, "I have been thinking about the arithmetic." He was very still. She said, "I have been thinking about it clearly and honestly for several months, and I want to say what I've concluded, and I want you to just listen." He said, "I'm listening." She said, "Clara is going to grow up, and she is going to grow old, and she will have the particular experience of loving a person who does not change, and I have thought about this extensively, and I have decided that the experience of being loved by someone who does not change, who was there at the beginning and will be there without modification for the duration, is not a deprivation. He said nothing. She said, I am going to grow old. That is the arithmetic I cannot change, and I have made my peace with it completely, and I need you to believe me when I say completely. She looked at him. She said, what I want to ask you is not about changing the arithmetic. I know what I am, and I know what you are, and I am not asking you to fix the difference, because I don't think it's broken. He was looking at her with the expression she had learned over this past year, was the one that had no management in it, the one that lived entirely under the court and the centuries. She said, I want to ask if you will stay. Not forever, because I don't get forever. For the duration of what I have. She paused. All of Thursday, all the Tuesdays and the Decembers, and the ordinary days. I want to ask if you'll stay for all of it. The cafe was quiet around them. The city moved outside the window. He reached across the table and took her hand. His fingers were cool and steady and certain, and she felt the temperature differential against her skin, the familiar specific cold of him. 15 degrees, wine cellar, January window, marble under your hand in the dark. He said, I have been staying since October. She said, I know, I want you to say it. He looked at her. He said, I will stay for all of it. She said, and when it's over. He was quiet for a moment. He said, I will have had it. He paused. That is not nothing. She said, no, he said that is the opposite of nothing. She turned her hand over and held his properly, both hands, the warm and the cold, the alive and the ancient, and she thought about clocks, the ones that had stopped and the one that was still running, and she thought that she understood now the difference. It was not that the stopped ones had failed. It was that they had been stopped by someone who could not bear to watch them continue, after the person they were measuring time with was gone. She was looking at a man who had stopped every clock. She was looking at a man who had given her one that was still running. She said, Percival is going to be insufferable. He said, he has been insufferable since September. He has been composing the documentation for what he refers to as, and here he paused, the permanent residential arrangement with significant personal implications. And he has used the word historic 3 times in the draft and refuses to remove it. She said, it is a little historic. He said, it is a great deal historic, and I will not be giving him the satisfaction of saying so. She smiled. He looked at her when she smiled. He had been looking at her when she smiled for a year, and it had not diminished. She did not think it would. Outside the window, the city went about its ordinary, magnificent business. The people moving in their ordinary patterns, lives assembling and reassembling in the way lives do, and none of them knew that the woman at the corner table had knocked on a wrong door at midnight in the rain and found the right one. She picked up her tea. It was cold. She held it anyway for the warmth. He watched her do it and said nothing, but she felt his hand in hers get infinitesimally, imperceptibly, 1 degree warmer, the way it always did when he had been still long enough beside her. 15 degrees becoming 16, becoming something less like stone and more like staying.